Thanks for listening to the PharmD Podcast Network.
Listening to the NASP Specialty Pharmacy Podcast, a collaboration between the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy and the PharmD Podcast Network. Each episode dives deep into trends, challenges, innovations, and patient-centric practices shaping the future of this dynamic and rapidly evolving industry. Whether you're a pharmacist or healthcare provider, patient advocate, or industry leader, you'll hear expert insights, real-world evidence, and thought-provoking discussion that highlights all that makes specialty pharmacy special.
In support of NASP's mission to empower specialty pharmacy stakeholders to advance the standard of patient care, NASP supports a free market healthcare system in which all specialty pharmacies compete on the same fair and level playing field, because that is in the best interest of the patients we collectively serve. NASP is committed to working with all stakeholders and policymakers to ensure that all patients have access to the life-saving medications they need and the high-touch patient care and support services they deserve from the pharmacy of their choosing.
Hello, my name is Sheila Arquette, and I'm the President and CEO of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy. I'm delighted to welcome my very special guest, Matthew G. Bowles, to this episode of the NASP Podcast. Matthew Bowles, PharmD, MBA, CSP, is a pharmacy clinical team lead with Vanderbilt Specialty Pharmacy, Vanderbilt Health. He is the primary clinical pharmacist in dermatology and the clinical lead over dermatology, asthma, allergy, and endocrinology clinics. Dr. Bowles holds a PharmD and MBA from the University of Kentucky. Matt, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Sheila.
So tell us a little bit about your role within Vanderbilt Specialty Pharmacy and your practice site.
I have actually been at VSP now for over 10 years, which is crazy. It's flown by. I started out as a floater pharmacist and then soon moved into the dermatology role. I'm also a clinical team lead, as you had mentioned. And then as the dermatology pharmacist, I work directly with the providers on all specialty medications that they prescribe. And as clinical team lead, I am the immediate supervisor of the dermatology, asthma and allergy, and endocrinology clinical pharmacist. Regarding the practice site, the Vanderbilt Dermatology Clinic is a very large practice. We have over 20 attendings, 3 mid-level providers, and 15 residents. We also have 2 main sites and 2 satellite sites that some of the providers go to 1 day a week.
Is your practice centered just in Nashville with that many providers? Like, how far is your reach?
So we have one major site in Nashville, another site down in Franklin, which is not too far from Nashville. And then we have a satellite site that's also in Nashville, just in a different area of the city, as well as another site that's about an hour from Nashville. Within dermatology, we have 2 specialty pharmacists. That is a recent change just because of the growth. So there's myself and another pharmacist. And we do have 2 technicians that are also with us in dermatology that are integrated into the outpatient dermatology clinic.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I just think back when I was in pharmacy school, right? That was all like, hopefully maybe someday that those types of things, those opportunities would be available. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's been very interesting since I've been here since day one with dermatology and how much it has grown.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your project titled Getting to Specialty Treatment in Dermatologic Inflammatory Conditions, Treatment Requirements in the Patient Journey. This was recently published in the Journal of Managed Care and Specialty Pharmacy. So what made you decide to conduct this study?
As dermatology, I saw a major uptick in specialty medications being approved by the FDA for atopic dermatitis and psoriasis and other dermatological indications over the past several years. We started seeing a large number of patient referrals that were coming to us where the patient did not start due to step therapy requirements. And oftentimes we would see the patient coming back soon after or being referred back to us after they had failed the step therapy. And I'll kind of add there, kind of like our process. So the provider decides to start a patient with a specialty medication, and then they send the referral to us, just a message saying, hey, I want to get this patient started on this medication for this diagnosis. And then our technician does the benefits investigation and the prioritization with the insurance. And then the pharmacist, if needed, does the appeal if it was denied. And then we also help with the financial assistance portion of it, if it's a copay card, or if they're needing, something internally that Vanderbilt offers, or programs outside with the patient assistance program through the manufacturer, or other type of financial assistance that's available. And then we also counsel the patient, and then also every single patient, regardless of the pharmacy they use, we are the direct contact regarding their specialty medication. So if they have been on it for 6 months and they're using another, using a pharmacy and having issues, they have our direct number to reach out so that we can help, troubleshoot what the issue is.
Oh, that's amazing. You're like an extension, right, of that provider's office, providing that clinical drug.
Yeah, we are pretty much fully embedded with the providers. So a lot of times I feel like I'm more on the provider side of things than the pharmacy side of things, just because we are so involved in, the special medication process.
That's awesome.
And, looking at going back to the project, that is kind of why we were able to see, kind of this breakdown that was occurring with, the referral process of, the patient being referred and then not getting started on medication. So when we started looking at this project, the objective was to evaluate medication outcomes and the time requirements to access therapy in patients required to use a step therapy or a formulary alternative after being prescribed a specialty medication. We did just look at psoriasis and atopic dermatitis with our patients.
So what did your study find?
So the first thing when we started looking at things, we wanted to look at formulary alternatives and step therapies. Formulary alternatives, they are other specialty medications that are preferred by the insurance. These are typically in the same class, but we did find that this approval time was much less than step therapy. So in the study, and we mostly looked at step therapies, which are typically medications that are required prior to getting approved for special medication. They are typically much cheaper, but oftentimes have more side effects and require much more monitoring for the provider and the patient. So we conducted a single center retrospective review of data collected from our electronic health record, as well as our specialty pharmacy management system. We included any patients that were referred by the dermatology provider for psoriasis or atopic dermatitis that was discontinued because the PBM or payer was requiring the patient to try a step therapy or formulary alternative between January 2021 and June 2022. We did look at the primary outcome, which is the number of days for the referral for the special medication, and then when they came back after failing the step therapy. And then the secondary income was the number of patients that failed step therapy or formulary alternative and were referred back to the specialty pharmacy, as well as the number of patients that did not start special medication and the reasoning behind that. So, our study, every patient, what we did think was very interesting, every single patient had already trialed and failed topical corticosteroids. So they had already done a step therapy when we were, submitting for approval for the special medication. But most insurances require at least one more step therapy outside of the topical corticosteroid. Most of the times it would be a topical calcineurin inhibitor or methotrexate.
Oh, wow.
And so our findings, which was a huge, 60% or 37 patients failed the step therapy with a medium time frame of just 75 days. And we had 25 patients that were included in the study that were not started on special medication, but only 5 of those patients benefited from the step therapy and continued the step therapy. We did have 15 patients that were lost to follow-up. It is very difficult to get into our site just because of it's a very busy clinic. And just, we have so many providers, but we probably could have at least another 10 for the demand. So we do have patients lost to follow-up for that reason. And then we did have 2 patients that had psoriatic arthritis, and typically that's handled by rheumatology. So they were able to bypass the step therapy requirement by going to rheumatology, and they were started on the specialty medication.
Okay. So what are the potential impacts of your study on specialty and managed care pharmacy?
With specialty pharmacy, I think conducting, a thorough medical history of the patients and what they have tried in the past. A lot of times when patients come to our practice, they've already seen a local provider, even a PCP that has already prescribed them topicals, or they may have seen a local dermatologist, but then they, were then sent to Vanderbilt and referred to one of our providers. So I think the specialty pharmacy and the dermatology providers just having a thorough medical history is one thing that I think is very important. With managed care, I think the managed care stakeholders should consider the impact of, cost containment strategies on patients' ability to start the needed treatment. Also with dermatology providers, having them understand that most insurances do require specific step therapies, and just having those step therapies done on the front end would help decrease that time frame to get the specialty medication eventually approved. But on the flip side of that, providers can have, they can really push with the findings we found with 60% of the patients coming back and failing the step therapy. It just goes to show that it's just a delay tactic. Providers do, these patients have moderate to severe psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and typically are going to end up on a specialty medication.
Right. Are they able to share that data back with like the payers or the PBMs to say, hey, look at, right? 60% of the people still have to go on, or is that not effective in having them look at their policies?
I think they could definitely share the data and the findings, but a lot of times, the PBMs and payers, they are just they have their guidelines and the requirements, and it's really hard to get them to change that at all. Even with, when appealing, they're saying, these are our findings and the patient's going to require this because they have moderate to severe. It's still a lot of times, I don't know with the findings, if they would be able to get the payers to really go the other direction.
Right. Okay. Just wondering. So what are the next steps with the results of your project?
One is sharing the findings with my dermatology providers that I work with on a daily basis. And then the other is, at the NASP conference, when I presented my findings and poster, I had several people actually ask, did the patients actually benefit from the specialty medication that they started, and were they still taking it? So at the PQA annual meeting, which is next month in Tampa, I will be presenting where patients were 12 months after starting the specialty medication.
Awesome. And those are all your patients, right? So there's no any kind of control with like maybe practitioners who aren't embedded with the clinical practice.
That is correct. They're all our patients.
Okay. All right. Because I'm sure that has a tremendous positive impact on at least I would think adherence, or if the patient isn't responding, right, then switching them to a product that perhaps they would respond to.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, any final thoughts, Matt? Any closing thoughts?
Really, after doing this study, the findings were very interesting, I thought, just because it goes to show you insurances and providers definitely have two totally different ideas on, what patients should be on. And a lot of times, the insurance is dictating what the provider is having to prescribe initially. And the findings specifically, show that typically the patients do end up on what the provider initially wanted them to start.
Right. That's quite telling, right? So was that, those whatever months, weeks, whatever it was that the patient was on that prerequisite drug, is that just a waste, right? Both in terms of, the patient's time and, time that they're not controlled, their disease isn't controlled, but then also the money spent on that prerequisite drug.
Yeah, a lot of times they have another, office visit to see how they're doing on their step therapy. And, if they are doing something like methotrexate, they're having to pay for the labs and things like that. So it definitely, there are costs associated with that as well.
Right. So this seems like a definite, I think it's a great project. The data is excellent, right? To kind of facilitate that conversation of, geez, how do we work better together, right? Keeping the patient at the center of this. Well, thanks so much, Matt, for chatting with me and sharing this valuable information.
Really appreciate you having me today.
And I look forward to seeing you at PQA. And as a reminder, NASP corporate members are invited to be my guest on one complimentary podcast per year. For more information about this or other NASP membership benefits and events, please feel free to reach out to membership@naspnet.org or visit our website, www.naspnet.org. Until next time, have a great day.